Goli, or greetings in Oneida. It is an honor to have you all here today. As we begin, I want to offer up a land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge the 13 tribes of the Kumeyaay Nation who trace their roots back 12,000 years in San Diego County, California. I do this to recognize whose land we are on. We are on Turtle Island, which is the indigenous word for what is referred to as North America, on top of Mother Earth. I ask permission to the Creator to share these words with you all, and I give acknowledgement to the Creator for the land we are on at University of San Diego on Kumeyaay territory. Yawanko, thank you in Oneida for your acknowledgement and respect. It is at this time I would like to acknowledge and thank my esteemed guests and colleagues for being here. I want to thank my wife, Julia, for being here off screen. I want to thank my sister, Chelsea, my other sister, Caitlin, who would be watching the recording later, to my mom, my dad, to all my relatives and everyone 7 generations before me and 7 generations after me, to my co-collaborators who couldn't be here, but some of them, just to name a few, Floyd, Byron, Mason, Dylan, to my 8 other co-collaborators as well, Yawanko, as this study would not have been possible without you and your perspectives. I want to thank Dr. Cheryl Getz's colleague, Sabrina Nelson, for being here today, Dr. David Karp's colleague, Sandy Somo, for being here today, to my colleague, Ashley McGuire, to my cohort member, Kalia, and to one of my other cohort members not here, Pedro, and also to one of my mentors, Bakari Savage. I just want to say thank you so much for being here today. It's an honor and a pleasure to put all of our minds together as we move forward on this historic and special day. At this time, we will now start the official dissertation defense, and I will now share my screen. So today, this dissertation defense is on Oneida college lacrosse players' perspectives of the sacred game of lacrosse. My name is Thomas James Reed. My Oneida name is Laguadio, which means he is a good man. I am a member of the Turtle Clan, which is part of the Oneida Nation, and I'm very happy to be here today. I want to thank my committee, first and foremost, to my chair, Dr. Cheryl Getz. Thank you so much for being spiritually in tune with me throughout this entire doctoral process and for helping me understand the world of action research. To Dr. Antonio Jimenez Luque, thank you so much. Gracias por todos usted for helping me better understand the effect to which colonization impacts the minds of the oppressed as well as the oppressor. And to Dr. David Karp, thank you so much for helping me better understand the practice of talking circles, which has been used by my family for many generations and which I'm now able to use in academia. So Yawanko, thank you to my committee for being here, and we will now move forward. An outline of where we are going today is our background, followed by a statement of the problem, then our 5 research questions, followed by a literature review, a methodology, our findings, and then lastly, a discussion. Well, first and foremost, a background to understand some of these things where we're going today. You got to understand the Oneida. So the Oneida call themselves the Oneidas Aga, which is people of the standing stone, also known as Uwe, the Oneida word for Oneida. They were one of 573 federally recognized tribes here in the United States today, and they were one of 2,000 tribes here at the time of colonization on what is referred to as Turtle Island at the time of colonization. The Oneida are one of 6 tribes that comprise the Haudenosaunee, which are also known as the 6 Nations, also known as the Iroquois, and Haudenosaunee translates to the people of the Longhouse. Well, for the Haudenosaunee and for Oneida, lacrosse is imperative and part of our creation stories. For the Oneidas traditionally, Oneida men are lacrosse players and orators. So it's a deep part of who we are and part of our tradition and our culture. Also, talking circles, an indigenous practice which helps people express themselves authentically. And it's been practiced by my family for many generations, as I mentioned before. And my grandmother told me that whoever is holding this eagle feather, or sometimes a talisman or a talking piece, that they cannot tell a lie. People form in a circle and they're able to share themselves, and listening is just as important as speaking is. Also the medicine wheel. So you can see this image here in the bottom right slide. And that image there, those 4 different colors, they recognize many different things. Some of them are the 4 directions. They could be the 4 different colors of all people here on Mother Earth. But for our study today, we were focused on the physical, the mental, the emotional, and spiritual. By examining and holding up the medicine wheel, we can see parts of ourselves that we can't normally, almost like using a mirror. And also we're talking about a Native American educational disparity. Well, to understand this, we need a brief history lesson in understanding Native American boarding schools, such as Carlisle Boarding School in Pennsylvania. From the late 19th century to the early 20th century, The motto of the Indian boarding schools was to kill the Indian, to save the man. Here, the students, their hair was cut off. They were forced from speaking their indigenous language. Their religion was taken away. And one of these people was my great-grandfather, Anderson William Cornelius. And at one point when he ran away from school, the school contacted his family and let him know that he was an enemy of the state for doing so and would be treated as such. He eventually returned to school and finished, and he played lacrosse, and it was one of the tools that helped get him through, and he eventually would go on to make lacrosse sticks. But also, to this day, that leaves a trace and an impact for us in education. As for high school completion rates for Native American people, is 57% of those Native American people will achieve, on average, a high school completion rate, as well as for the average rate is 84.6%, so a significant disparity. As well as for bachelor completion rates, for Native American people, it is 13%, whereas for the average, it is 27.9%, so nearly less than half of the average. And to clarify, for a definition of leadership for this study is we are looking at what it means to be Oneida, and that is this Indigenous specific leadership perspective and definition. And that is to have a good heart, a good mind, and a strong fire. A good heart is to have a love for yourself, your community, and your world. A good mind is to be at peace and also to have a generous sense of humor. And a strong fire is to recognize your spiritual fire and your ambition, and also your ability to ignite that spark and that flame in others as well too. So a statement of the problem why we're here today in our study of why we did what we did. Well, it comes from misconceptions in knowledge about the Oneida. In 2009, Mark Paulus at Marquette University put forth research on Oneida people, Oneida people, and mental health. But other than that, there has been very little research about Oneida people specifically. And if there has been information written in academia about Indigenous peoples, it is unfortunately incorrect and it spreads harmful misinformation. A quote here from Alvin Joseph E. Jr. in 1961 stated, "In the generations of discoveries that had followed, the Indians had turned out to be Stone Age savages, considered so far below the intellectual level of white men as to deserve only extermination or the patronization and contempt of a superior race for an inferior one. The Iroquois had appeared to be no different. Their great numbers, military prowess, and ferocity had deterred the encroachments of whites on their lands, but the latter, while acknowledging grudging respect for their power, had continued to class them as unthinking savages, incapable of intellectual accomplishment." Now, this passage is particularly alarming as this text was one of the most frequently adopted texts for courses in Indian history or Native studies, stated by Warner and Grint in 2006. So there's indeed a problem, and there is a need for information to be said about Oneida people, their perspectives, and their contribution in academia, and what they have to be said about lacrosse and their perspectives on it, what it means to them. So here we're going over our 5 research questions. First and foremost, we're looking at research question 1, which is how, if at all, do Oneida college lacrosse players preserve their traditional sacred values of lacrosse at their respective university communities? Research question 2, how, if at all, do Oneida college lacrosse players transmit their traditional sacred values of lacrosse with their respective university communities? How do they share that? Research question 3, how do Oneida college lacrosse players frame their perceptions of the sacred game of lacrosse using a sacred medicine wheel, which is the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual? Research question 4, what aspects of the sacred game of lacrosse do my fellow Oneida college lacrosse co-collaborators and I think are important to share with other people? Research question 5, what impact does using talking circles have on enabling the participants to speak authentically about their heritage and experiences with lacrosse? So a literature review. One of the important ideas to understand here is colonization, coloniality, and the myth of a post-colonial world. Colonization is the forced Eurocentric perspective on Indigenous populations, whether this be through genocide, epistemicide, which is to get rid of thoughts and to not take seriously different Indigenous knowledge systems and way of thinking, through manifest destiny, through Indigenous boarding schools, through many different things. And there is this myth of a post-colonial world that for some reason we have moved past colonization, that we are beyond this, when in actuality, there is still been very little of inclusion of Indigenous perspectives in academia, let alone reconciliation for the harms that have been done towards people in an act towards reconciliation and restoration. And also, there still needs to be much work towards decolonization still. Next up is also a distrust of researchers in Native American communities. Well, a couple examples here. The first is for the Havasupai people in 1996. Arizona State University researchers went to these people and they asked to take blood samples so they could help them with diabetes prevention. When in actuality, the researchers took the blood samples of the Havasupai people and studied mental health issues without their consent, as well as tried to disenroll members. As well as through the 1970s, it is estimated that a quarter of Native American women were given hysterectomies without their rightful knowledge or consent. So it is for this reason there is a great deal of distrust of researchers in Native American communities, as well as other examples. There's also a Native American importance of circles. So we talked about Native American importance of talking circles, but also just of circles in general. When I was speaking with Chief Orrin Lyons, he told me that all of our ceremonies as Haudenosaunee people revolve around circles, that we as people, our life revolve in circles and the seasons as well too. So just as the ceremonies follow the seasons, our life follows seasons, that we are all young in spring, or we are all born in spring, we are young in summer, we are old in fall, and someday we will all die in winter. Black Elk Speaks once said, "Everything an Indian does is in a circle, and that is because the power of the world always works in circles." So this notion is important for understanding this study and what was carried forth. And also we're looking at 5 decolonizing ideologies from Linda Tuwai Smith, a Maori researcher who in 2013 put forth 25 decolonizing ideologies, and 5 of them, which were focused on for this study particularly, were claiming, celebrating survival and survivance, indigenizing and indigenous processes, restoring, and protecting. Now for our methodology, this was an action research qualitative study that used community-based participatory research. Now there are 9 principles of community-based participatory research, one of which is acknowledging the community as a unit of identity. Another is to utilize community resources. And last is commit to a long-term process with co-collaborators, which is certainly what we all are doing as co-collaborators from this research moving forward. Also, I used an O'Leary action research model with my co-collaborators. And this went through the 4 stages of observe, plan, reflect. Observe, reflect, plan, and act. Observe, reflect, plan, and act. So we would go through those 4 stages, and we would do this in between talking circles. And talking circles, as already mentioned before, we would do these, and we'll talk about them more through our data collection and procedures. Now, looking at a map of our Turtle Island here on the left side of the screen, these were our 13 co-collaborators, where we were all at. And as you can see here, our names are on the right-hand side as well too. Well, we were 13 men, ages 18 to 24, with myself as a 31-year-old from 5 different universities. We were 11 undergraduates, 1 2019 graduate who is now an assistant coach at the collegiate level, where 7 of the other co-collaborators attend university, and 1 doctoral candidate. Players started playing lacrosse from the ages of 6 years old to 15 years old. Now, why the real names? Usually it is a norm in study to protect the privacy of participants and to use confidentiality. However, with my co-collaborators, I want to acknowledge their contributions towards academia and what they had to say for being put forth for generations from now, to lift up their words and acknowledge their knowledge as co-collaborators. And in doing so, I wanted to give them a chance to share their stories in their own words as well too. Each of the co-collaborators at the end of the study were given a form, an exit form, where they could change to remain anonymous. They could change any information they wanted to as well too, or if for anything else, I also sent them their biographies if they want to confirm the information, which they all did. So I want to say Yawanko, thank you, and Oneida, to all my co-collaborators for sharing their stories and for being able to use their real names. Also, we talked about our data collection procedures. So we did 5 Zoom monthly talking circles with specific prompts aligned with the medicine wheel. So we did 5 of these. So our first was on values, for instance. So we went 4 times around the talking circle with the co-collaborators, where we talked about what do you value physically, what do you value mentally, what do you value emotionally, and what do you value spiritually. Now, before each session, we played 30 minutes of lacrosse just to get our minds and our hearts in the appropriate place. As you can see on the left-hand side of your screen is what was sent to the co-collaborators as a care package intentionally to create a shared space, even if digitally and remotely. Also, we carried out Instagram weekly talking circles, which were done for the 4 weeks between each of the monthly talking circles. So for instance, for the first Zoom monthly talking circle was about values. So following that, we had a 1 week on Instagram weekly talking circles of talking about what do you value physically? The next week, what do you value mentally? The next week, what do you value emotionally? The next week, what do you value spiritually? And also, I carried out personal journal weekly reflections where I looked at the 4 stages of the O'Leary Action Research Cycle, the 9 principles of community-based participatory research, and the 5 Indigenous decolonizing ideologies from Leonard Twy Smith to see where we were at on that process and reflect through it. So some of the findings, and I hung these findings upon the framework of the sacred medicine wheel, which is the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. So for the physical, some of our takeaway as co-collaborators was the importance of role models, what it means like to have people who look like you in academia, in media, and what that means to have that representation. Also was the importance of hair. 5 out of the 13 of us co-collaborators had traditional long hair to express ourselves. And even those of us who had short hair, it was recognized that hair is still an important part of us as Oneida Aga, as Oneida people. And also the importance of wooden sticks. These are recognized as a conduit and a spiritual connection to the spirit world. CJ Summers here stated, I go into the woods. Also, I just walk in the woods with my lacrosse stick in my hands and do whatever. And just think about everything else that's been going on in my ancestors majority of the time because of what I'm holding. Co-collaborators here also, some of them will have Oneida names, which were given to them through different protocol and procedure. And for CJ's, his is he gathers feathers. Also, Oneida have 3 major clans, and those clans are the turtle, the bear, and the wolf. The turtle, their responsibility is to protect the environment. The bear is to be the protectors of our medicine, and the wolf is to be protector of our traditional ways. Next is about our mental, for our takeaway being the positivity that happens, really a good mind that happens from being around the game. And this happens from remembering the game, just thinking about the game, as well as all of us being lifelong learners, whether we had started playing at 15 or whether we've been learning the game from a very young age, all of us committed to the process of being lifelong learners and recognized how important that was. Dylan Granquist stated, I value lacrosse mentally because of how big a stress reliever the game is for me. When I play, it refreshes my mind and put things into perspective for me. While I play, it allows me to think and relieve stress. It helps out all my problems by putting them in front of me instead of on my shoulders. After I play, I feel confident in my ability to get through my next obstacle. Whose Oneida name is He Pierces the Heavens, Wolf Clan. Emotionally, we recognize the huge importance of community and what that meant to us, and also how healing the community was for us, as well as the game of lacrosse itself. We also recognize the importance of sharing. Part of having a good heart and having a love for your community and your world is being able to share with your heart first. Richard Summers III says, so okay, I'm studying to be a graphic designer, right? And I'm learning new techniques and everything. And I know I haven't done this. Yeah, this is my goal for the future, to take what I know and share it through illustration, or share it through whatever, share the game and show its value with the traditional side and exposing our culture to the world, sharing it with the world. And that's my future goal, to share our game with the people through graphic arts, cool merchandise. I just want to share our game through graphics. That's my future. He shakes the feather, Bear Clan. And our last takeaway from our framework of our findings was spiritual. And that was our connection to our ancestors and everything we do, recognizing that our ancestors walk with us, as Dylan Granquist reminded us. And also recognizing the origins of the game, the first lacrosse game, the spiritual teachings from that game that we can learn from, as well as the spirit being sacred and real and how important that was. Just as much as any of our other senses, the spirit was very much sacred and real to be found. Byron Halona stated, especially when you pick up the stick for a little bit, you just feel that power and just that deep connection that we have with it. Yeah, like that awareness. It seems like small embers that used to be, like you said, the Renaissance here in Oneida, Wisconsin, and now it's grown to a nice strong fire. And then each generation, they're adding on to the fire. And I mean, that's what I'm hoping to do too, is to continue to keep adding to the fire and keep growing the game. And it's been awesome. He knocks off the frost, Bear Clan. Now we move into our discussion as we respond to our different research questions. Well, response to research question 1 is, how, if at all, do Oneida College lacrosse players preserve their traditional sacred values of lacrosse at their respective university community? Well, we recognize we did this through community, that we are stronger together. There is strength in numbers. And as it is said that there is the strength of the pack is the wolf and the strength of the wolf is the pack. And also remembering the origins of the game, that all of us could just think about this and remember the game. Byron Halona said, and when you're at practice, it's like, hey, we got to do this better. We got to do this better. And you kind of just forget sometimes, like, hey, this medicine game, where it derived, and just being mindful of that stuff. He knocks off the frost, Bear Clan. Our response to research question 2 is how, if at all, do Oneida College lacrosse players transmit their traditional sacred values of lacrosse with their respective university communities? Well, we talked about sharing through a Standing Stone Lacrosse social media account. So a new social media account that we're working on right now that would work on sharing our culture for other Oneidas people who are young, as well for future people going into education, as well as people who are not Oneida or not Indigenous, that they'll be able to learn more about our culture, to educate them as well too on important issues. And also to share the game through our positions of influence, whether that be as a friend, as a teammate, as a coach, as an announcer, as an academic, wherever we can to share our voice for this game, that we would do so. That message that is important to be told. Byron stated, so for me emotionally, the enjoyment is still there when I go to coach, and it transferred from being on the field to being on the sideline now as a coach for the emotion from me. He knocks off the frost, Bear Clan. Our response to research question 3, how do Oneida College lacrosse players frame their perceptions of the sacred game of lacrosse using a sacred medicine wheel, which is the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual? Well, one of the takeaways that we had as co-collaborators was really this importance of life in full circles, that for all of these different quadrants, that none of them lived in isolation, that all of them were connected. And this really was said well by Floyd Silas, as during the end of our study, during our last talking circle, we took a step back and looked at some of our findings. And he stated, I was honored to ask to be help you out. And it was really fun. Like, it opened my eyes a lot too, because some of the questions you asked aren't really things you ask yourself or think about every day. So just to get the chance to think about it again and really put some time and thought into my answers to your questions, it was nice. It was a good change of pace to just actually talk about it instead of just doing. He who gathers the leaves, Bear Clan. For our response to research question 4, we talked about what aspects of the sacred game of lacrosse do my fellow Oneida College lacrosse co-collaborators and I think are important to share with other people. Well, we've talked about our Standing Stone Lacrosse social media page. We've talked about art through Richard Summers III. And now we're talking about recommendations for the Oneida Business Committee. Well, in the dissertation itself, we have about 4 to 5 pages of specific recommendations. And one of these really hinges on a indoor multi-sport facility that is used for lacrosse and other sports as well too, with turf throughout all year use. Attached to this is an Indigenous traditional foods restaurant, as well as a shake bar that can be used and utilized by athletes, as well as a lacrosse and multi-sport store with an embroidery store attached, as well as a traditional art store that can showcase different artists, local artists, such as Dana Isaac and his wooden lacrosse sticks that he makes as well too. And Byron Halona stated this, what is the capacity that we can do stuff? What's our facilities? What can we use? The box edition is huge because it opens a lot more possibilities, but we've always run into the problem of the capacity. Once winter hits, it is nearly half the year for Wisconsin. So that's where we always run into the issue, is that time constraint. And we don't really have a facility. We don't have an indoor turf facility. We have the Civic Center, the high school, and then also the Oneida Family Fitness, but those are all small basketball gyms. I mean, at that point, if you want to try to convert that, it is a lot of money to invest into something when you could probably create another facility if you put a little bit more effort into it. He knocks off the frost, Bear Clan. Into our response to research question 5, we talked about what impact does using talking circles have on enabling the participants to speak authentically about their heritage and experiences with lacrosse? We found it was very effective. To be Indigenous peoples using an Indigenous practice of talking circles, talking about our traditional Indigenous game of lacrosse, all those values very much aligned and worked in a synergistic fashion. Also was the power of the sacred silence that was shared between us as co-collaborators. Now, I have carried forth talking circles with different peoples and at different opportunities, but I can say never have I felt such an opportunity of this sacred silence that was shared with this people, that it really was a research as ceremony of bringing our minds together. And also unity. There was room for disagreement, but at the end of the day, it really called forth our higher selves and also called forth our spiritual selves. And everything we did, we were putting our minds together. Dylan Granquist stated, I like this because I never really asked anybody their perspective on it. I never sat down to ask anybody really any of these questions. What I find really interesting is I had a college professor last semester talking about how the more minds you get together, you add all those years up, you take all our ages, add them up, and that's how many years of experience we have. Not one person is smarter than all of us bringing our minds together. He pierces the heavens, Wolf Clan. To bring our discussion to a close here, some of the points I want to touch on is our limitations. Well, this study was unique in terms of my positionality. If another researcher who was not Oneida, not a lacrosse player, and not even my same age, would very well yield different results. They most likely would. However, there are still implications for future researchers. And this has to do with studying the relevant curriculum for Indigenous peoples, what it means to have your Indigenous knowledge systems recognized in values in academia. Also, the importance of role models, representation, and what it means to be seen in whether in academia and in life, as well as having this similar co-collaborator fashion be used with different populations, whether it's different Indigenous groups, different affinity groups, what have you, different populations able to use the same framework that we used. And also a clear path of knowledge for myself as a researcher, and that is studying appropriation versus appreciation, of saying who benefits as we're using this Indigenous game of lacrosse and also this Indigenous practice of talking circles, who benefits and where does the line go between appreciation and appropriation. So I look forward to studying and learning about that more, as well as representation in media, such as in comics and video games. Richard Summers III talked about the importance of art and media and how important that is, as well as Dylan Granquist talking about how media can really shape the minds of young people. So these are both comics and video games are things I plan to study in the future for representation of Indigenous peoples. Lessons learned here for myself as a researcher is to trust the process, is to amplify the voices of my co-collaborators. As an Oneida Aga, as an Oneida person, is to recognize in everything I do that 7 generations of my ancestors walk with me, and everything I'm doing it for 7 generations ahead of me. As a practitioner, I recognize the importance of the spirit and how real that is, to trust my instincts. As we bring this dissertation defense to a close, it was with this mindset of research as ceremony. As Cree researcher Sean Wilson said, that anytime you get multiple people in the same room thinking about the same thing for just a moment, miraculous things can happen. So it's with this, I offer you this final prayer before I offer you then some sacred moments of silence. And it goes like this. Let's put our minds together. So be it in our minds. Yawanko, thank you so much for your time. And it is now that I will field any questions you all have.